Okay. Tov, I hope you had some time to go through some of the stuff in Chavruta. We're now going to talk about the next section of the Mishnah. So we started with Arvei Pesachim Samuch Lemincha Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetachshach, and then the Mishnah continued, and it said, Afilu Anisha b'Yisrael, even the poor person in Israel, Lo Yochal Ad Sheyasev, shouldn't eat until that person leans. Okay, he or she reclines. So now the question is, why on earth are we talking about a poor person in the middle of this Mishnah? This Mishnah is talking about what you do in preparation for Pesach, and all of a sudden in comes a poor person. So what is the poor person doing here, and what is the relevance of the fact that there's a poor person here? So the first thing that we saw is that the Tosfot mentions that there's two ways to read this. And this is why I said that when you read with a commentary, it's very tricky, because there was no way that I could have done this when I put the English in a way that you could have come to the conclusion that Tosfot came to. Because if you look at the text, the way I have it up here, there's no punctuation. Erev Pesachim samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetachshach, afilu ani sheb'Yisrael lo yochal ad sheyasev. Now those three words, afilu ani sheb'Yisrael, even a poor person in Israel, could be read with the previous sentence, and it could be read with the upcoming sentence. And like I said, when you punctuate it and you give the translation, there's no way to reflect that. And Tosfot basically gives both those options. Tosfot says here, even a poor person, okay, doesn't eat until ad sheyasev. So now why did first of all, if you notice, the Mishnah, again, if you pay really careful attention, you'll notice there's a difference between the words they use. Ad shetachshach and ad sheyasev sound very similar. You can't eat until it gets dark. Even a poor person can't eat, and you would have expected until a time, but it doesn't give you a time. It says until the person reclines. So now you see there's lack of, it's not parallel, those two things. So that leads Tosfot to say, why did it specifically use the word ad sheyasev? So Tosfot says, Sal kadatach, you might have thought, ani lo chashiva heseba. Maybe when a poor person leans, it doesn't count, right? What do we do when we lean at the Seder? We all bring down our pillows and we lean on our pillows. Now here it says, ein lo amala hasev. Maybe this poor person has nothing even to lean on, and therefore, ein ze derech chirut. Maybe this isn't a way of freedom. If you don't really have the proper way to recline, then it's not called freedom. So comes the Mishnah to teach you, even a poor person would need to do this. What's the problem? The problem with this interpretation is, where did we come up with leaning? It didn't tell us before about reclining, as if it's obvious, but okay, it could be possible. Everybody knows you need to recline on Pesach. But then Tosfot suggests an alternative. Yesh mefarshim da'adela elkai. Maybe the words afilu ani should be read from the previous sentence. Don't eat until it's dark, and even a poor person. Why a poor person? So they say. Maybe a poor person didn't have food for days, or maybe for hours, didn't get breakfast that day. And maybe they're starved. Okay, he says, Afilu ani shelo ochal kama yamim. Maybe someone who didn't eat even a bunch of days. Lo yochal ad shetachshach. It comes to teach you, even they have to wait. So if you finally got some food, you were poor and you didn't have food for days, and you finally got food in the afternoon, sorry, but you can't eat. And maybe that's what it's trying to tell you. So those are two possible reasons that Tosfot suggests. Okay, Tosfot is a conglomeration of commentaries from France in the 12 to 1400s. So when I say Tosfot, it means someone from Tosfot, somebody put together different opinions from that time period. We'll talk a lot more about it, and we'll learn what typifies Tosfot versus Rashi. This is really just a first class introduction. With Gemara, I mean, even in 10 classes, we're not going to get through everything, but we're going to touch on different points as we go along. But I wanted to suggest another reason for the poor person. And part of what is important is to see, when we learn about the Seder, is to see things in light, and we learn Mishnah, Gemara, in light of the historical context. So what was going on in those days? Who were the main players in society? There were the Greeks and the Romans. They were the most popular. Now, the Greeks and the Romans had symposiums, and they would sit around and philosophize, very similar to our Leil HaSeder. We sit around, we talk, we philosophize. And we have big banquet, right? They reclined. Where did the reclining come from? The Romans, right? It's all the background of that. So the idea here is that the Mishnah is telling you, even though they take things from other cultures, and yes, they had these ideas of these big banquets and reclining and everything else, but they understood that ours are different. The Greco-Roman symposiums were for the wealthy. No poor people ever came to them. They wouldn't allow the poor people in. And the Mishnah is coming to tell you right from the start, when you start your preparations, you have to consider the poor person. And that's trying to say, yes, it's okay to learn from other societies, but we have to take it and apply it in a way that is relevant to us. And that leads us to our next line, which is a very interesting line. Lo yifchetu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin va'afilu mina tamchui. When you have poor people, I should pull up the text. When you have poor people in your society, the Mishnah is telling you, you have to take care of these people, right? Lo yifchetu lo me'arba kosot. Now, again, if you read with the translation, and they should not give him less than 4 cups. So the simple interpretation here is who's they, because yifchetu is grammatically meaning plural. So who's they? So Rashbam says, Gaba'et tzedakah. These are referring to the tzedakah collectors who support the poor. In other words, there's people whose job it is in society to take care of the poor people. And then it says, and therefore, huadinami im lo yitnu lo. But then, what's the problem? There's another line. The next line says, afilu mina tamchui. Tamchui is the charity. They call it the charity plate here. Okay, what exactly? It means people who got food like from a soup kitchen. Okay, so what does the tamchui have to do with this? Because the soup kitchen gives out food. It doesn't give out wine. So what he's telling you is, by the way, if you notice, the Rashbam is saying, it's talking about whose responsibility. Right? The real idea is who's responsible to take care of the poor? Who's responsible to make sure that per person has 4 cups of wine? So according to the Rashbam, it's the tzedakah collectors. It's their responsibility. We get it from the words lo yifchetu. However, he points out that im lo yitznu lo, but if you don't just wait for them to come, tzarich sheyachazer b'kol kocho acharav. You have to go out of your way. If you're the poor person, you have to make sure to get yourself 4 cups of wine. He even says further on, if you have the text in front of you and you want to look ahead, he says further on, I didn't give this to Chavrita, but he says that if not, you have to sell your clothes, yimkor malbusho, o yilvet, or take a loan. Like, you have to take this seriously. So on the one hand, he says it's the responsibility of the community. On the other hand, he says, but if nobody takes care of you, then you've got to take care of yourself. Now, if we look to the Tosfot basically proves the Rashbam's point. And he says, how do we know this? And he starts to deal with grammar. He says, and again, this is where if you pay attention to the words, it says lo yifchetu is plural. And he says, and therefore it must be talking about tzedakah collectors and not the poor, because the poor person was mentioned in the singular. Even in ani, a poor person, that's singular. So when it talks in plural, it must be talking about the tzedakah collectors. But then he says, and you can't say yifchetu, maybe he's referring to the 4 cups. Maybe the plural there is relating to the cups. You need all the cups, and that's what the plural is for. But he says no, because it says from 4 kosot, which means it means first there's yifchetu, don't give him less than, and then it says from the 4 cups. But then he has this great line. He says, what's this line doing there? If it already says that this people have to take care of the poor person, why does it say mina tamchui? Why does it say that you have to get it from the charity plate? So he says, it's great. He says, lo yimanami lekabel kadei lekayam arba kosot. He doesn't say like the Rashbam, that the poor person has to go out of his way to figure out a way to get it, sell your clothes, sell other things of yours. But he says, you shouldn't prevent yourselves from getting. Okay, meaning, now what does it mean? Why would a poor person prevent themselves from getting? Now, what is Tosfot basically saying? Tosfot is understanding what a poor person feels like. Could you imagine being poor, having to stand in line to get your 4 cups of wine? You might say, it's just not worth it. It's humiliating. It's right. I have to put myself out and put myself in this situation that's uncomfortable for me, right? I don't want to be in that situation. It makes me feel bad about myself. And Tosfot's saying, in this case, you can't prevent yourself. And that he actually says that in a sense, he's saying like the Rashbam, the responsibility is on the community, but he's saying that the responsibility is also on the poor person. The poor person has to put himself out a little. And instead of saying you have to sell your clothes, he's saying, go wait in line and get it and go to the charity. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's not pleasant, but this mitzvah is important and therefore you have to do it. So what's nice about Tosfot is he gets into the interpersonal, thinking about what this person feels like and how it must be hard. In the end, he says you have to do it anyway, but it's sort of a statement about where people are in society. We'll end with the Ritva. The Ritva has a different approach. It's interesting. His approach is that the full responsibility here is on the poor person. he doesn't understand yifchetu, the plural, as being the tzedakah collectors. He's looking at the individual. You're an individual, you have a responsibility. So he says, he quotes in the name of Rabbi Yechiel mi Paris, okay, from Paris. He says it's obvious. Obviously, the poor person has to do mitzvot, even the poorest of the poor. And therefore, lo yifchetulo is talking about the poor person. In other words, the point is you have to do the mitzvah, even if you're poor. And what he's telling, and then the question is, what's this afilu min tamchoy coming? When the tamchoy has nothing to do with wine. So what does he tell him? He says, and this connects with the second thing the Rashbam said. Im ein lo ela mazon shtei seudot, yimkerei v'yikach mehem arba kosot. If you don't have you only have 2 meals. Now, in general, people went to the tamchoy. People in general only ate 2 meals a day. And certainly you weren't allowed to take from the charity plate more than 2 meals. But he's saying here, even if you have 2 meals, which generally would mean you can't go to the charity plate to get food, you have to sell those meals, buy your 4 cups of wine, even if that's going to put you in this position that later on that day or tomorrow morning, you're going to have to go wait on that line and get food, you still have to sell what you have in order to take charity. So again, both of them in different ways. So again, the difference between the Rashbam and Tosfot on one hand and the Ritva on the other is who's the ultimate responsibility. The Rashbam and Tosfot view it as a communal responsibility. When it comes to the poor people, everybody has to worry about them. Then if nobody worries about them, well, then the poor person has to worry about himself. And then we get to, okay, well, even if it puts you in an uncomfortable position, right? Either you have to sell or you can end up basically having to put yourself in an uncomfortable position and take stock. The Ritva is saying, no, it's fully the responsibility is on the poor person and you're obligated in mitzvot. And sometimes you have to put yourself in a situation. You might have to sell your clothes and tomorrow you'll have to go to that soup kitchen, but the mitzvah is more important. It surpasses everything. And what it shows us is this idea. I see someone's asking, by the way, on where you can find the Ritva. So the Ritva is not on this page. There's a bunch of commentaries. This is a good background. It's good you asked that question. The page of Gemara has a bunch of commentaries, but it doesn't have everything in it. Okay, so there's many, many commentaries that we're going to quote throughout the class. And in general, there's many commentaries that aren't found on the page. And that's why I brought it on the Chavruta sheet. But you have this beautiful idea of communal responsibility, right? Whether, again, there's a debate whether it's communal responsibility or individual responsibility. And that's also something that's always kind of debated, right? How much you should let the community take care of you and how much you should yourself make the effort to do things on your own. And even what I like about Tosfot is something very, very interesting, because Tosfot, by saying, don't prevent yourself, you might think that accepting tzedakah is you're not doing anything, right? You're just, someone's giving you something and you often feel like I'm not doing anything. And when Tosfot is cognizant of the fact that by you not stopping yourself from taking this, by overcoming that uncomfortable feeling and saying, you know what, the mitzvah is more important, I'm going to take it, that's already an action. You've already done something that's important. And you've taken action, and Tosfot's cognizant of that, which is interesting because you usually think of tzedakah, giving and you're just taking, but taking sometimes requires a lot of effort. So what we saw today, just to review, okay, we saw the Mishnah. The Mishnah seemed like a very simple, easy to understand Mishnah, but I hope that in trying to learn it on your own and then learning it together, you saw that we asked all sorts of questions. So let's just review very briefly. Questions on words or terms, okay? So we have, what is mincha? What is even a poor person in Israel? What's it referring to? Is it referring to ad sheyasev, right, until he leans, that he has to lean, or is it referring to, he can't eat? Lo yifchetulo, who is that referring to? These are all questions about the words and who they refer to. The next type of questions, the reasons for the laws. So there we have why ad shetechshach, for example. Why are 4 cups so important? By the way, we didn't answer that question, but that's also a good question. Why specifically 4 cups are mentioned here in the Mishnah and not other mitzvot of the night? It doesn't say you have to sell to get matzah. It says specifically 4 cups of wine. Okay. One thing we're going to learn is that we won't always get answers to all of our questions. So that we didn't get to today. Specific definitions or laws that are missing. Lo yochal, what can't you eat? What kind of food? Lo yifchetulo, whose responsibility is it? And then when it gets to specific use of wording, Why did it say, let's say, Ad Shetechshach, and it didn't say until Seder Kochavim, until it gets dark out? Why did it bring up the ani in here, right? Why did they specifically talk about a poor person? So all of these are good questions, right, that we ask on the Mishnayot. So what I'm going to have you do for next week, you don't have to do this. This is all only if you want to do it. But there's a quiz, okay, a self-checking quiz, as I said before. That will be a good review of all the things we went through today. You can always go back and you can review. You can do more of the chavruta on your own now if you want. Sometimes it's good to do chavruta to prepare something before I teach it. Sometimes it's good after I teach it for you to go through it, and it's a good way to review and to see how to read the text. And then what I also put up on the, again, in lesson 1, you can find it. There's a sheet with all the Mishnah, all the Mishnayot that are in this chapter in Hebrew and in English. And under each Mishnah, okay, you'll notice it starts at Mishnah 2, okay, because we already did Mishnah 1. What I'd like you to do at some point, you don't have to do it this week, you could do it next week, you don't have to do it at all, but it'll only help you with your learning, is to go through all the Mishnayot in this chapter and do what we did today, which is ask questions, okay? Again, you don't have to get to all the answers, but ask questions. Why did the Mishnah do this? First of all, a lot of it will be familiar because it really describes what happens during the Seder. And as we go through the course, we're going to deal with a lot of the Mishnayot, not all of them, but a lot of them. And if you have the time to do it, it's definitely recommended. Go through, ask questions. Feel free to ask as many questions as you want. You can try to look up your answers on your own or just ask the questions. And then when we go to learn those Mishnayot, you'll already have some background and you'll already have thought about things. And when you think about questions, it helps you to better understand the commentators. So thank you all for joining. Sorry for some of the technical glitches in today's class. We will work them out for next time. And it's great having you all here. It's amazing to have 300 people online learning together. Next week we will meet at this time and have a great week.